play in this. I'm truly honored this morning to welcome this amazing man to our conference and kindly ask him to address you all. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Ms. Selvin Govinda, for the very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here to share my views about your space, which is space for procurement professionals, people who are playing a very key role. My topic this morning is revisiting collaborations from theory to practice. First of all, let me make a disclaimer that I hold no qualification in finance, and I'm not a supply chain and logistician, and I'm not really in leadership of supply chain. I don't even have a qualification in commerce. But it's very important that I have to give you my views from the leadership of the institution perspective and what gap am I seeing and how we can address them together as a system. First of all, this is the game plan, the theory, from the global purchasing consortium around the world to collaborative procurement, benefits, challenges, findings, and of course, coming back home and look at the reality and the practice, and the recommendations, and of course, conclusion. I have been doing a lot of research around the space, very interesting. And I wanted to share with you this paper by Professor Young from MIT, Emeritus Professor Young from MIT. And he's actually saying that the decreasing student enrollment and reduced operation budgets are a huge challenge. And this is familiar to us as South Africans as well. And many institutions, logically, the very first response is to look at how they can up the tuition fees. That's a logical situation. But we know that in the country now, we are talking about a framework that is actually regulating the fee increase. So that space is actually closed. But he is also making a very good suggestion to say, let's look at our processes in terms of improving efficiencies, especially our business processes, with special reference to procurement. And I wanted to pay attention to that particular space because it's a space that we sometimes overlook. Now, I think it's important to say that higher education is not out of the woods yet. We have heard from the introduction from the CEO that we are having challenges in terms of cuts, in terms of subsidy, in terms of the reduction as far as a block grant is concerned, and those decline in subsidies are going to continue. And it's very important that efficiency and effectiveness in higher education is improved. And a more joined-up approach has the potential for large savings. And I hope this is the role that the Purchasing Consortium of Southern Africa is actually playing. But what is important, which sum up those particular blocks, is that universities are already good at working collaboratively on the procurement space. So that means that what we need to do is to ensure that we look at the gaps in this collaborative space as to how we can actually contribute as a higher education institution, given our challenges. This slide is defining what we mean by collaborative procurement, which I think you know. Collaborative procurement is where two or more organizations team up to conduct purchasing activities with a goal of achieving financial and operational efficiencies. Now, as I said, I took time to go around the world. I also visited a number of institutions, and I also asked questions about how are their consortium functioning. And I was actually thrilled. I mean, in the UK, in Scotland, and in England, North America, and I was getting some answers that were the same. And of course, there are those that I think were context specific. But what one can actually say in all those consortium, even the latest one from MIT and Harvard, I realized that procurement or university procurement, as they say, is not a sexy subject, but essential for our future. I think this may resonate well with procurement professionals, that there are so many things happening in that particular space. And of course, some of them can easily land you up in trouble in terms of corruption. Isn't we know that as a country, we are having challenges when it comes to corruption and fraud. And if you look at it in terms of the procurement of goods and services, a lot of things are happening in that particular space. Sometimes sheer threats is actually emanating because you are dealing with billions. And at times, some institutions, I know that the officials are having bodyguards because you have to ensure that you keep certain elements away from the processes. Then, of course, the purchasing consortium around the world is also actually giving me an information around how we can work together and how we can show where appropriate we align our practices and deliver what our members need and when they need it, and adding value or social value and embedding sustainable and responsible procurement and delivering social value. Please underscore sustainable and responsible procurement, because one thing that is coming a number of times, when you talk about procurement, they are talking about either ethical or either sustainable or either responsible procurement. So there is that qualifier everywhere where they are talking about this particular aspect. So the opportunity for consortia to help university achieve value through their procurement is very clear from the study that I've made. That means, summing up all this particular aspect, is that the opportunity for consortia to help universities achieve value through their procurement is very clear and is the way to go. It is also important that lessons learned from elsewhere, and as I've indicated, if we are to leverage the benefits of collaborative procurement from the UK, for example, they are talking about responsible and ethical procurement. So it depends on the number of people, their integrities, their ethics that you're actually putting in these particular offices. That will actually assist us in terms of maximizing effectiveness as well as addressing some of the SDGs. I'll talk about that later. And this is the strategy to embed, underscore that, responsible procurement. And of course, if you look at that particular slide, address climate change and related issues by a member institution. The question of climate change, it has been discussed so many times, but we know that there are doubters, there are denialists, and all sorts of people around the question of the climate change. So it's very important that we centralize this particular topic and we talk about it, particularly here in the Western Cape where we are having the Mediterranean climate. Mediterranean climate, in Africa we've got only 2 regions we all know. It's here in the southern tip of Africa, as well as the north, or the so-called the MENA area, which is the Middle East and North Africa. That is actually a challenge. And of course, I'm talking about those areas of Morocco. I'm talking about those areas of Spain. I'm talking about those areas of Portugal, particularly the town of Seville in that particular area there at the Horn. So it's very important that that impact of climate change, especially in Mediterranean areas, that is actually addressed so that we can actually talk about responsible procurement. And I also look at the work of Emeritus Professor Ian Diamond, who talked about the report on efficiency and modernization, that we should have that 30% on non-pay spent, which should be through effective collaboration, and the target was 2016. And we should actually build on annual achievement. And I'm sure that, PECO, you also have those particular targets. And the supply chain collaboration is a hot topic, but there are reasons from that, because if we improve our efficiency, if we collaborate, if we build capacity among institutions, we can be able to achieve this as a system. And then, of course, collaborating effectively across the supply chain have enjoyed a dramatic reduction in inventories, in costs, together with the improvement in terms of speed, in terms of service level, and customer satisfaction. Now, what are the benefits? We all know these benefits. I will not go through all of them. It's about buying power, the power of numbers. It's about the data, which I still think that there is a major work to be done as far as data is concerned. The monetization of data, and of course, process efficiency, sharing not only the best practice, but as well as the leading practices in the space, and will be able to save for the market. And then the key question is actually why. I think this has been addressed in terms of the rising cost of education. I will pass this slide quickly. And then the benefits continue as well in terms of better information on which to base the decision. If we are talking about data-driven decision-making and data analytics, you have to talk about that particular aspect. And more efficient processes, I've talked about the spending power and development and sharing of best practice. I've talked about that particular subject. And very key is the whole question of data. Data is everybody's business. If we are to aspire to be a data-driven organization, we have to monetize our data. And that's why I was impressed when I look at the work of PEQ, because it's actually moving that particular direction. The value creation, value realization, and who is accountable, but at the same time, addressing the key risk, particularly with the advent of Popeye and the others. It's very important that when we handle data monetization, we look at all those particular aspects. But we cannot run away from analytics in terms of decision-making. Now, let's look at the challenges. As I say, no deus ex machina. There are no gods that will come from machine or elsewhere to assist us. We have to work hard, because ex nihilo nihil fit. Nothing comes out of nothing. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So no deus ex machina, there are no gods that will actually give us the results. We have to work hard ourselves. These are the challenges that are still vested in the system. The ESG strategies, ESG clarity, climate change, sustainable brands, eco-business, supporting local SMEs. But in all that suitcase, one is talking about protecting the environment. I always talk about our people, our planet, our wildlife. We cannot survive without addressing those particular aspects of looking after our planet, the only planet that we have, so that we can bequeath it to the next generation in the same as we've actually found it. I always have people saying, but people are talking about this carbon dioxide or the GHG in space. And we always say it's very important to say this gaseous carbon dioxide, even though you are talking about 414, 415 parts per million in space, is not small. It's potent because of a number of things. One, because of the geometry, molecular geometry of carbon dioxide, as well as the composition of carbon dioxide. As well as if you look at carbon dioxide absorbed at multiple wavelengths, and it emits at a wide range, including the infrared radiation. So its solubility as well, that's why we're talking about acidity of the oceans. It's also actually soluble in water. So it's very important that we protect the climate and all the activities that we are carrying through. We expect PECO to assist us in terms of addressing the issues that are making sure that we are talking about development, but not only development, we have to qualify that we talk about sustainable development. How can we achieve this? We have to plan ahead. We have to communicate regularly. We have to share roles and responsibilities. We have to be realistic. We have to use lots. Now, some of the key findings in my study are around the spend analysis. I think my institution included. We can benefit a lot if we mine our data and ensure that we have appropriate spend analysis so that we can actually improve our efficiencies. And the purchasing strategy or sourcing strategy is also important. And of course, one can also talk about the purchasing process if we are to ensure that the process is lean is best, and ensure that we can realize the benefit from our procurement spend. And of course, the purchasing policy. Now, these are some of the recommendations. I have actually seen that there is a lack of institutional understanding and engagement with the procurement process. I can tell you a number of institutions, you can actually engage a number of institutions, unless if there is litigation. If there is litigation, and the Vice-Chancellor is supposed now to appear before court, because certain service providers are fighting for a particular tender, you'll start actually seeing people now studying the procurement policy. And that's very late. I think it's important that there is an understanding of the procurement policies and the processes. And there must be continuous improvement. And that now is number 2 there around raising awareness about procurement and the policy. And then, of course, continuous development. The Procurement Academy is so important because the area is not static. The area is evolving. And that's why I'm happy with the word evolve, which is the E in the team, that we have to ensure that the process is evolving all the time. But alas, we all know, a number of institutions, without exception, the processes are not automated. They're still very much manual, spreadsheet after spreadsheet. From the bid evaluation committee, bid adjudication committee, you go all the way up. It's manual. The process is manual. And we cannot be, as a higher education, we have to ensure that now we automate and we benefit from AI. And of course, we have to ensure that we collect auditable data, that if there's improvement and impact, I think that impact is very much important. The whole research element should be incorporated in the whole aspect. And in the UK, I realized that they have actually measures which they call efficiency measurement model that are actually embraced in the EMM. And of course, the last slide I'm saying data is everybody's business, and we must actually mine it accordingly. And there must also be surveys of procurement activity called procurement maturity assessment. Because if you are to serve the community, university community, you have to have feedback as to whether they are satisfied with your service. But in many cases, these offices are very obscure. At the back in the store, there are your chief buyers there. They are really not in the limelight. They're just doing their work, and of course, we are just benefiting. But we have to ensure that within institutions, there are regular surveys about the satisfaction, whether we are meeting the stakeholders' needs. And then, of course, we have to build capacity, endogenous capacity. The area is specialized, and it's very important that we build that particular capacity to create the last block there, which is a social value. And then one can talk about the code of conduct, supply chain code of conduct, particularly in a country like ours. We cannot escape that particular aspect, that we don't want to read what you are reading in the newspapers about the propensity of some institution being captured. We don't want that. You have read so many things in newspapers about certain institutions, and it's very important that the integrity of the processes, particularly on the procurement of goods and services, is beyond reproach. And I've talked about the climate change and ecological emergencies, that those are things that whatever we are doing, we must incorporate them. And then, of course, the whole question of corruption and fraud should not be associated with the higher education sectors. These are some of the suggestions that one is putting forth around applying sourcing strategy, which strategies are using to source, climate and ecological emergencies, circular economy solution, and actively take steps to reduce the risk of corruption in our consortia. And then, of course, we have to work together to ensure that we don't go alone as an institution, but we work together and benefit on the numbers. I am also suggesting that it is important for PECO to work very close with USAF board, as well as TENSA board. TENSA is a body for University of Technology and Comprehensive. I think at a senior level, we'll have to have those particular discussions where we can talk about sourcing strategies, we can talk about a business strategy, digital strategy, as well as data strategies. We are spending a lot of money on IT licenses, and I think we can do something about it. I know there are members of S-Audit, which is actually trying to ensure that now they capitalize on numbers as well. But also looking at the policies across the sector and risk mitigation together. Now, towards the end of my presentation, I'm left with 11 minutes, is that the whole element of innovation. We have to embrace innovation. We have to ensure that we come up with innovative solutions. And simplicity is often the trademark of innovative solutions. And we have to ensure that while resources are important, innovation is not only about money. It's also about how do we ensure that we are making process simpler. And of course, the last block there in blue is saying procurement staff should be changing agents in organization, defining new ways of collaboration. That's the evolution or evolve in the team that we're actually talking about in this conference. And of course, AI in the supply chain, I've mentioned this, that even in the first world, AI in procurement is lagging behind, and we are way behind ourselves as a country. We have to automate our processes, and of course, supply selection, purchase order processing, contract management, demand forecasting, and inventory management. Some of the process can easily be automated, but we are used to that element or where we are actually ticking the boxes on our own, and the human error come in, and the biasness sometimes come in, and that's where you commit an error. And before long, the Vice-Chancellor is actually at court. Is answering a particular question. Now you have to reverse a particular tender because this was not there. It was supposed to be there. So it's very, very important that we don't actually leave that particular room for errors. We can actually do that if you automate some processes, but we must actually ensure that we feed our machine good data. The last one is utilizing advanced analytics. This is just not rhetoric, it is reality. Using advanced analytic for decision making, data-driven decision making, because you are sitting on tons and tons of data, and you can actually tell a story from procurement side. So it's very important that we utilize that particular data to tell us the story. As they say, we must actually touch the data to confess. We must touch the tons and tons of data that we are having to tell us a story. And sometimes the story that it's going to tell is a story that you don't want to hear. But as leaders, we should be able to listen to that particular story because the story will not actually be wrong. Well, when I was at the University of Harvard University recently, as well as MIT, I had the privilege of engaging my counterpart that side. And I asked them a number of questions because you know, this institution called Peninsula University of Technology, I'm sure many of you know that institution, is having huge aspiration to be the MIT equivalent of Africa. And we're actually learning a lot from them, and we've signed with them. And this is what the Vice Principal of Finance told me, that at MIT, which represent many of MIT's largest areas of spending. It was on technology. We talk about software, consulting, licensing, travel and hospitality, and ground, hotels, catering, you name them. Staffing, laboratory and research, which is, of course, every university we know, there's always a challenge. When the researchers are looking, professors are looking for their reagents, they want them yesterday. Otherwise, the experiment is actually stalled in there. Otherwise, they are escalating matters to the Vice-Chancellor. Well, creative spaces, web design and development, professional services, legal, where we are spending a lot of money, tax, around tax, and other business services as office supply. Those were the 7 aspects that we discuss and you compare notes to say, these are areas that we as MIT are procuring a lot of our goods and services. And I think if you can focus on this particular area, and this is typical for any institution, we will be able to make a dent in terms of making saving within the institution. And the other lesson that I also learned was that new employees, when they are onboarded or inducted, they have to undergo certain courses. That there is no way that you can actually manage procurement office if you don't actually know the policies yourself. And sometimes it's a question of, is this PFMA apply? Are we an organ of state or not? Those are the debates. What are the landmark rulings? Those particular aspects, we must ensure that we induct our people, because some people come from a different space. They don't actually realize the limitation of PFMA in our space, whether it's applicable or not. So this is something that is saying it's introduction to strategic sourcing, contracts, and procurement, and is offered by highly talented individuals. In fact, professors of supply chain, they should be able to give you the latest in the space. And when I was there, I was starting to think, and I went back to the NRF data to say, do we have NRF rated? And if they are rated, which rating do they have that are professors of supply chain in the mold of Professor Young? And I realized that we are very thin as a country in that particular space of supply chain. And this is a body of knowledge that we must ensure that we don't only talk about procurement academy, but at the very highest level, we have to ensure that we have people who can actually assist us in the space about what is actually new and what is cutting edge. I've talked about this particular aspect. I'm actually coming back to it. Goods, work, services, and utilities is an area, again, particularly the last one around utilities, that universities are spending a lot of money, and they need to be monitored. IT, I've talked about it. Energy, I've talked about it. Library databases is an area that I think is not fully exploited in terms of saying you've got 2 or 3 professors that are using certain databases, and they are costing us an arm and a leg. Are we supposed to be having that, or through collaboration, we can ensure that we open those particular spaces to ensure that we collaborate as institutions? And I've talked about legal and litigation. That space is becoming problematic. When I was discussing with one of my colleagues, he said, VC, the other space, now we also have the other element of construction mafia. When you are building a particular building, we have to be very careful. We don't need to disclose it now because we may be in trouble. That's the space that we find ourselves, and I think we can be able to come up with a solution in this particular conference, and taking into account the realities, the contextual realities of South Africa. Well, towards closing, corruption in South Africa and higher education is there, and it's real, and it's still actually afflicting the sector, and there are still a lot of procurement irregularities that we should be able to be on top of. And trends across the world is actually telling us that we have to talk about responsible procurement, sustainable procurement, ethical procurement, as well as competitive procurement. And it's very important that we also look at some of the nuances around this procurement specialist. Because what I learned from MIT as well, there are people who are real specialists, not generalists, but real specialists who are hired by institutions like MIT, which is always number 3 in the world. And of course, it's around those particular specialists. Are they well paid? Is the procurement a good career? But it's important that we should always ensure that we have the whole pipeline and we can actually entice the young ones around the procurement. Because many of you who are here, you're not going to be in procurement forever. We need the full pipeline of people who can actually be your successor. And of course, people who can actually be professors in the areas as well. Do we pay attention on the evolving role of procurement specialists? And the answer is no. How many professors of supply chain do we have in the country? That is actually a challenge. And I've adapted this particular aspect to say we can only address these challenges if we work together as a team, if we support PERCO in all its endeavors. because what they are doing, we have seen that there are consortium around the world, and they are immensely helping higher education institutions. Sometimes it's a question of time that they're actually helping us. At my institution, I remember way back we were saying, you know what, if there are tenders, big tenders that are controversial, hey, can we allow PECO to deal with? And they have actually done well in those particular tenders, because once they are in, sometimes there are challenges along the chain, not at the supply chain sometimes at management, sometimes even at a very, very high level in terms of the conflict of interest. So it's always that we apply the arm's length principles that we're actually taking this out completely. So, Program Director, let's transform, let's evolve, let's adapt, let's monetize, particularly the data that we are sitting with. Chair, it's actually about 0 minutes left. I wanted to say thank you, and of course, I will be failing in my duty if I don't say enkosi kakhulu, diabulele. And I will also be failing, particularly being in this region, if I don't say dames en heren, baie dankie. Dit is vir my 'n groot voorreg om enkele gedagtes met u te wissel. Baie dankie.